the ultimate message that you're trying to get out there to our audience today?
There's a lot of data out there, and just because there's a lot of data doesn't mean we want it all. I think as we dive into the discussion, data quality is always top of my mind.
What are some of the toughest challenges in measuring and managing data quality for unstructured data, particularly?
It's literally a gold mine, but if you rush in, it's not going to tell you what you need, and you're going to get errors out of it. So, I think the challenge is, partially in the structure, partially in the appeal of the information itself.
Welcome back to the Don't Panic, It's Just Data podcast, where we explore data's impact on the future of business. My name is Shubhangi Dua, the podcast producer and B2B tech journalist at EM360 Tech, and your host this episode. Joining us today is Herb Blecher, Research Director, Data and Analytics at Enterprise Management Associates. It's so great to have you on, Herb. How are you?
Doing great. Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Likewise. So, how about we begin today's episode by setting the agenda? What is the ultimate message that you're trying to get out there to our audience today?
Well, I would start by saying that there's a lot of data out there, and just because there's a lot of data doesn't mean we want it all. So, I think as we dive into the discussion, data quality is always top of my mind. So we'll talk about it, I'm sure. Really just how we use the data, and with the abundance of data, the best way to handle it today.
So, before I dive into the main questions, what is the one key thing about data quality that you want the audience to keep in mind?
I would say we shouldn't rush into it. So you want to know what your objectives are. You want to know what questions you want to answer.
And there's a lot going on in the industry about unstructured data. So I think my first question to you will be about how unstructured data now it comprises of the majority of enterprise data, and enterprises are beginning to leverage that. Why has data quality become a bigger issue with unstructured data than it was with structured data sets today?
It's funny because I don't know. I'll show my age, but to me it was all unstructured at some point, right? So somebody had to go out and get the information, and even when we were taking documents in the old days, I'd take my financial trade ticket and I'd have to key it in. That was unstructured data moving into a structured format, and so unstructured data is I would say has always been the majority of enterprise data. The difference now is that we've cracked the code. We have access to it, and we can. I think unstructured data is better. The term is better as unstructured data source, because we're applying structure to it. We're using tools, machine learning and AI to apply structure to those things. But as we do that, it scales up both the good and the bad. So, there's so much information in there that, the quality issues just scale up. But, on the small little, 150 column database that I was looking at with, 10 million records, my quality issues felt big then, but the scale of what we're looking at now, the complexity of what we're looking at now it's just enormous. So, we're not comparing two numbers, or two columns of numbers anymore. We're trying to discern tone and kind of comprehend images and things like that. So the complexity has gone up. The ability to sort of turn that unstructured data into something that we can then analyze, it's so appealing. And I think our tolerance, as people, has evolved a bit. So, we'll take 6 fingers on our, images of generated images from OpenAI or whatever, just because it's cool. So the abundance of data out there and the ability to kind of give a little wiggle room around it, if you will, is kind of increased that quality question. So, size, scale, accessibility, automation plays into it as well.
Absolutely. And I think it just takes me to how much of it is actually usable in real time. So,
That's right. I wish I had a percentage. I would guess that it's a tiny fraction because if you think of the reams of documents that are just sitting in filing cabinets and
mhm,
locked away in storage somewhere, I mean, how long have we been calling into customer service and they say this call might be monitored for quality assurance? That was
mhm,
way before AI. They've been doing that forever. So presumably those are stored somewhere and those are accessible. So the amount out there is well, I don't know what it is, but I imagine it's extremely large, and the amount that we can actually access now is small relative to that. I think one thing to consider with that is that in the data for data's sake
mhm,
retention space, you have to be careful with that because security, privacy, data breaches happen all the time. So again,
mhm,
not only do you want to be thoughtful about what data that you're analyzing, but you want to be thoughtful about what data you're retaining to make sure that,
mhm.
you're not exposing yourself to risks.
It's great that you brought it to the complexity of the issue itself, because that was going to be my next question. So where is it that enterprises still struggle to ensure that data quality, especially when it comes to AI? How should they ensure that it does not affect areas like financial documents, particularly, especially in the fields of, I don't know, cybersecurity or banking systems? Because AI, while it's great to accelerate your technology, your operations, it may not be the best from the perspective of how unpredictable it is.
That's correct. So I think where AI struggles is one question. What domain it's struggling in is another question. So, if I'm scanning documents, I don't know, in a low stakes situation, I'm grading school pay. I don't know what example you'd use. I'll take errors over there. But that same error, on a financial document can have huge impact. That same error on a healthcare record can have a life or death impact. So, I think the AI challenges are fairly uniform, right? So we've all struggled with OCR scanning, blurry commas turning into periods, footnotes getting misinterpreted,
Mhm.
different types of headers. I mean, I've had arguments with people whether an M should mean 1,000 or it should mean 1,000,000. So, you've got these nuances within the financial documents, but you would think that this should be easy, right? These are financial forms. They have structure to them ostensibly, and their numbers, but the stakes are so high that the risk associated with applying AI to that and potentially getting an edge case error is enormous. So I think the frame, the domain that you're applying your solution to unstructured data, that really matters. So, if we're struggling with things like document scanning and things like that in finance, imagine when you get to things like interpreting pictures or interpreting conversations when we're talking about customers.
Paint me a picture of a real life example of, like, I don't know, a crisis a company is experiencing, and how you've sort of come in as an analyst, or like what you've seen in your experience, the most challenging situation perhaps when it comes to data quality.
So I've been in government situations, during the financial crisis where, we didn't have AI at the time. So,
Mhm.
this isn't, a today's scenario, but the stakes are similar, in that, we were developing, um, the data collection as these programs, as these solutions were taking place. So nobody knew how they were going to solve the financial crisis. We were throwing everything at the wall to see what stuck. And how do you analyze that? So, you scramble as quickly as you can to collect the data, and then, you put it together, good enough data, is good enough, but you have to have that human judgment, to play a role in it. And so, I think when I think about a crisis situation, and, I had several during that phase, where you had to address issues, it was always the human aspect that came into it. So, it was someone applying some sort of judgment, some sort of explanation, or modifying what they did with the data. So, right now it's AI producing the data, but also consuming the data, right? And so that's a new paradigm. When humans consume the data, we can look at something and say that looks off, right? So, just, people wait. We hesitate, we stop, we say that looks weird. AI just, as it currently stands, it barrels ahead, and if it doesn't have the answer, it fills in the gaps, and it fills in the gaps confidently. So, I think, back to your picture, the crisis situation, it's always going to involve some form of human intervention. I don't see a place where you're going to get away from that.
I'm kind of glad human in the loop is what most, even AI companies, as they like to call themselves, I like to say machine learning, but as
Yeah.
most AI companies like to emphasize, human in the loop is just necessary. I mean, ultimately, how I see it is that humans are now leaders and they have assistants, which are AI or AI agents now. So that's how I like
Yeah.
to view it.
100%. Yeah.
Definitely, right?
Yeah.
So moving on, what are some of the, I think I kind of did ask you this question, but what are some of the toughest challenges in measuring and managing data quality for unstructured data particularly?
It's funny. We always talk about this. I'm abusing the terms, but the single source of truth. What's the yardstick? And I used this example before. So when you're looking at two numbers, I can look at two numbers. I can add a series of numbers and be deterministic about that. But as we get to more complex systems, we're filling in the gaps. So we used to rely on. We had a lot more faith in, or I don't know if we had faith in the computer, but we gave our computers a lot less leeway. So they were calculators in the past, and I like the way you put it as that they're machines, right? So these machines are going to be. We're asking them to fill in the gaps. Now they have incomplete information. Fill in the gaps in that information, and so that. We're open eyes going into it. So that's the challenge of the unstructured data. It's the same challenge that we'll have ourselves. So you have to have that continuous feedback loop. I can't tell a fake Picasso from a real Picasso. And so, those challenges just scale up enormously when we're thinking about AI or machine learning, being applied to unstructured data. We just have to, it's a gold rush. We look at all this data and it's literally a gold mine. But if you rush in, it's not going to tell you what you need, and you're going to get errors out of it. So I think the challenge is partially in the structure, partially in the appeal of the information itself, and taking it somewhat out of that context. When it's expressed in a confident way, humans can express doubt. So, I can go to someone and say, I've got these numbers, I'm not quite sure, but, it seems like the less information that the machines have, sometimes the more confident that they get. And so, we just have to be careful about that as we're asking it, we're applying it to these more complex situations.
Absolutely. And where do you see opportunity? Like, you've talked about challenges. Now let's talk about, where do you see opportunity, maybe this year or maybe in a couple of years? How do you see it progressing?
Oh yeah, and gosh, I probably should have talked about that at the start. I mean, it's already done amazing things, and you can go all the way back. But if you had a Roomba, right? that was a good example of machines that could figure out a space and take in that, it was unstructured data and, pulls it in, but it's very, it's very physical. It's concrete. So, self-driving cars, we're seeing it there, and like you said, I see it as really advancing us in all aspects. So even in places like healthcare and finance where it's dangerous, if we do it correctly, the opportunities are enormous. And specifically, we'll be able to answer harder questions, solve bigger problems. I agree with you totally that the job of people, and I'm sure, I'm surprised we haven't talked about it yet, because I hear it all the time, is that governance is now becoming the key, right? So we've got the technology in place. We need to be the governors of that technology. So we need to be the overseers and make sure that work is going okay. We can't have blind trust in the machines to do everything right, especially when they come to us and say, "I've got this answer and it's exactly right." Make sure you question that.
Absolutely. So, how are top organizations combining AI, data, observability, and human oversight to improve unstructured data quality?
Well, they're doing it in a variety of different ways. Some good, some bad. I would say the most successful companies, they're doing it because if you go in too fast, the appeal of the reward makes you take a risk, and you might find, I've got this gold mine of unstructured data. I'm going to go in there, I'm going to just gather it all and spend all this money, and you don't get the answers that you need out of it. And so, I think what the companies that are doing it right are, again, figuring out what questions you want to ask at the start, figuring out how that feedback loop is going to be created. So, measure twice, cut once. So, let's go in deliberately with a plan, with the governance framework, do the continuous monitoring, have our feedback loops, keep a human in the feedback loop, because if you take the human out of the feedback loop, you're going to scale those errors. It'll just amplify itself. And so, making sure that I guess a degree of skepticism and a degree of caution is what we're seeing in the most successful instances. Just planning it out, using those tools, extremely powerful tools that are going to do a lot for us, just doing it in the right way and not rushing in.
Can you give me a practical use case or insight from EMA's research?
Yeah. So on our research, I mean, what we're generally finding to that point is that the expectations rarely meet the realities. So, and this is consistent, it's, I don't have the percentages in front of me, but, 70% are thinking that they're going to go in and it's going to change things. And, 30% are happy with it. So throwing out numbers, but I shouldn't do that as a data analyst, but here I go. But, the difference is stark in that way. And so, I think, again, going in and then doing that risk analysis, making sure that it makes sense is really, really part of the process. Those are where the companies are succeeding the best. Those are where the companies are happiest with their.
Is there an example of such company that you have researched on and that's like out in the public that you can provide, like a successful company that you've seen and their pattern?
Well, we see the successes and we see the challenges in doing things. So again, as we look out in the industry, I don't think that many people, they want to be driving someday. They'll be driving, but they'll have that option. Where it's been unsuccessful, it was very public. McDonald's decided that they were going to implement AI in their drive-throughs, right? That did not go well. So, taking that unstructured data, of people talking into the machine, and it's happened with a variety of different customer service organizations as well. We've seen that when you put an AI, like it must drive you crazy. You're like, we'd all rather deal with a human, So I think you can look at the successes in sort of the more deterministic realms, where you've got, cars and things like that, and sort of the challenged areas. And that speaks to the level of structure around the data that we're dealing with. So, tone, conversations are very hard to discern.
Looking ahead to 5 to 10 years, how do you see data quality changing for unstructured data?
Well, yeah, we're not all going to be on the beach, I don't think. I think being served by our AI servants and relaxing and enjoying the life of leisure. I don't know. I don't know that I see things terribly different from a data quality perspective. Let me correct that. So we're always going to be dealing with data quality issues. The caliber or the question about whatever we're trying to answer, that's what's going to change. But to talk about the potential of AI, it has a potential to answer questions that we've been challenged with, for ages. The problems we're able to tackle with it, and this is in cooperation. The problems we're able to tackle are unprecedented, and so I don't really see an end to that. Like, we're not going to answer all the problems. We're just going to come up with new problems that we'll have to answer questions about. And so, we're there is no edge, right? So we're trying to protect ourselves from edge cases in data quality, but we're just expanding, and so maybe the edge gets bigger because we're applying it in so many cases. So I think we're still going to be dealing with data quality issues. I think that's going to be an eternal truth with data, but the problems we're going to be answering, the problems we're going to be solving, the questions we're going to be asking, those are going to be much bigger questions. So I'm really excited about that.
Definitely. I agree with you on that one. We will continue to evolve, but with that evolution comes new problems and new challenges.
That's right. Yeah. Well,
new solutions.
Never escape it. So.
My final question to you today would be, what is the most important takeaway for CFOs and IT leaders who are investing in AI-driven data strategies? So what is the one thing that you would like for them to know today?
Yeah, so I think I'd go back to that theme of be skeptical and apply governance. So, the promise of AI, there's a huge amount of potential there, but a lot of people are making promises, and again, we see this in EMA's research where the expectation just doesn't match the reality. So keep that in mind. Put the right structures in place, governance wise, and don't turn over the trust, and don't get too caught up in the gold rush of data. More data isn't always better. You'll do better if you take your time, and you're thoughtful. Governance and skepticism.
I get it. Don't follow the rapid gold rush.
No, well, it's hard, right? Everybody's moving. So in business, if you don't move, you're left behind. And so, I get that, but I think if you do it the right way, you can keep up and do it correctly.
Thank you so much, Herb, for joining us today. We had a wonderful conversation discussing data quality, unstructured data, machine learning, or AI, whatever you want to call it, and the democratization of data. Also, the future of analytics. So, lots to talk about and lots more to hear from our audience. If you have any questions for us, please do reach out. Herb is one of our analyst partners, and he'll be here to answer some of your questions if you have any. So, do email us. Also, thank you to everyone listening. We hope you took a lot away from today's podcast. We'll be back next week with another episode in our podcast series, Don't Panic, It's Just Data. So make sure that you subscribe wherever you're listening from and join this conversation on our socials at EM360 Tech on X and LinkedIn. For more great content, head over to our website, em360tech.com.